From the day we arrived on this planet and blinking, stepping to the sun, there's more to see than can ever be seen, more to do than can ever be done. There is far too much to take in here, more to find than can ever be found. But the sun rolling high through the sapphire sky keeps great and small on the air that's round. It's a circle of life, and it moves us all through despair and hope. Through faith and love, till we find the place on our path unwinding in the circle of love.
good evening to you and welcome to this special edition of African Drums on this after 2 days after independence, 3 days in fact. And so we are having a special panel here to talk about something that is pretty important to us as Guyanese. As was advertised, we are focusing on 56 years later. How close are we to the dream? One people, one nation, one destiny. And I have three guests with me on the program this evening. I have the esteemed former Prime Minister and former Mayor of Georgetown, Hamilton Green. I have our young parliamentarian and attorney at law, Amanza Walton Desir, and another attorney, a young man who has been contributing to the discourse in the public space, particularly in the newspapers and so on, Ronald Daniels. And so this evening we're going to be talking about this concept of one people, one nation, one destiny, and where we are with that 56 years after independence. Welcome to the program, lady and gentlemen.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Thank you ever so much for having us.
Now, I think the most fitting approach to deal with tonight's program is to have Mr. Hamilton Green tell us about independence and the quest for it and the dream that would have been envisioned in the minds of those who crafted that struggle. Because you were just telling me that only two of you who attended the... Well, just tell us about that. Yeah, the two of you are alive.
Well, the Independence Conference was held at Lancaster House in November of 1965, intended to dot the I's and cross the T's for what I believe was generally agreed should be our independence. Independence for a nation is part of a human desire, globally, internationally, of our freedom. We remained as a British colony under the control, and I use the word control deliberately, of at one time the Dutch, French, and lately the British. With the advent of the Second World War, which ended in 1945, I think it was a sort of catalyst for people in the former colonies to demand independence. The mantra was, if we can work, slave, and sacrifice our lives for Britain and the other colonies to get their independence from Germany and Japan, why should we still be shackled with colonial policies and positions? And so the struggle was enhanced after the war, even though it started before with people like Quitch. When Burnham came back and joined forces with the Dr. Jagan, Mrs. Jagan, and Hubbard and Ashton Chase, he provided what I call the intellectual stimulation, who articulated eloquently what we needed for independence. This happened in the midst of the Cold War, and I assume that listeners would know the rest. The Cold War was a vicious struggle between what was known as the Communist bloc led by the Soviet Union and the Western bloc led by the United States and the United Kingdom for power to control the entire world. Burnham understood the nature of that Cold War and had the ability to navigate those troubled waters. Dr. Jagan, and I named Jagan and Burnham as the two titans who fought for independence, did not quite appreciate the complexities of that struggle, of a country with less than 1 million people in this part of South America and the Caribbean, with less than 1 million people, as I said, in the context of a very brutal Cold War, where the struggle was for control of mines, territory, and resources. And I recommend to all of our young people to read first a book written by a Britisher. It is entitled Confederation versus Annexation to the United States. That title itself tells a story. The United States had already come forward as a superpower, particularly when Theodore Roosevelt assembled that massive Great White Fleet and spent almost 3 years around the Pacific and the rest of the world. In fact, one of the ships came to Trinidad, none ever came to Guyana, British Guyana at the time. That frightened the Japanese and perhaps caused what we know now as the attack on Pearl Harbor, but that's another matter. The point is we need to see our struggle for independence in the context of the world as it was then. It is difficult because Sir Winston Churchill once intoned that he was not appointed His Majesty's First Minister to preside over the liquidation of the mighty British Empire. Those words speak to the need of the struggle. So in 1953 we had an advanced constitution which ought to put us independence in another 6-7 years. It was suspended because the British papers and documents said they did not want Guyana to be engulfed by a communist regime. Dr. Jagan, who I said is a sincere man, believed in the Soviet Union and communism and didn't understand the intellectual dexterity that was required to navigate in those troubled waters. And so when the suspension came in 1953, it was a moment of trauma, particularly for those young activists like myself, teenager. We saw the clouds closing in on us. Burnham cautioned to be careful how you deal with the British and the Americans, but Chetty himself didn't understand the need to be astute. And I'll give one example because we don't have the time for me to go through a lot of details. When the Rosenbergs were executed for treason, Ethel and Julius Rosenberg, many countries throughout the world appealed for clemency, but President Roosevelt could not grant that clemency because this communism thing was so strong. The Rosenbergs were accused of selling secrets to the Russians or the Soviet Union. What made it difficult, as a young side didn't understand why Chetty didn't understand what was going on. Mrs. Jagan is a Rosenberg. And we cautioned because the press ran with the story that here was Mrs. Jagan, who was considered El Jefe at the time of the PPP, was a Rosenberg. In my book, Paint a Piece, I noted, I believed her when she said that she was in no way related to the Rosenbergs. But that is how propaganda goes, as we see today. And so that put the country in a difficult state. But fast track, we went to the elections in 1957, and people have accused the blue-eyed Bauchi, as Mrs. Jagan was called, of stirring up this wicked phrase of Apanjab, which means vote for yourself. And that has been our difficulty since then. Again, I give an example. Sidney King, who we now know is A.U.C. Kwayana, extremely popular on the Lower East Coast. But he refused to go on the ticket by the PNC, well, the PP Burnhamite, or the PP Jaganite, and went on his own. Burnham decided not to field a candidate.
But
But Jagan did, and he brought in a nondescript lawyer called Balam Singh Rai. And because of Apanjat, Sidney King then, now E.C. Quina, lost by a narrow margin. I give that example to say how intense this race thing was. We went on to 57, when the PNC, Bonamai changed its name to the People's National Congress, and to 61, when we again wanted independence. Both of our titans agreed that we'll go to London to demand independence. But by then, discrimination was at its highest point in this country. And the PNC said then, we could not go into independence in circumstances where there was this racial condition. Jagan argued very strongly that the PP had won 20 seats at the 20 elections, the PNC got 11 seats, and the United Force got 4 seats. I was General Secretary of the party by then and understood what happened. And so we came up with a new system of proportional representation, which we use today for electoral system. Because even though the PP got 42.3% of the votes, they got the 20 seats. And we argued that that could not be equity and asked the British to change the electoral system. Jagan refused, did not agree, after 3 conferences. And the rest is now history.
So
and
when did this point of imposing a solution come about?
Well, let me come to that.
All right.
That is so tragic, it is amusing.
Right.
When the British suggested that they should break the deadlock, because the PP took a fundamental position, one, we keep the voting age at 21, the PP wanted voting age reduced to 18, elections before independence, no elections, we go straight to independence, with the chamber as it was, 2011-4, and that we should have, I said, independence at that juncture. Bonham said, no, you don't represent the majority of people. Let us go back to Guyana, hold the plebiscite so that the majority of Guyanese put the 3 issues to them and let them decide. The British said 2 things. That will take a long time and further delay the granting and fixing the date for independence. But Dr. Jagan, for some inexplicable reason, signed a document saying he had great faith and confidence in the British sense of justice and fair play, and left it to the British to break the deadlock. The result was, the British, after a long analysis, came up with elections before independence, elections on the new system of proportional representation, and to maintain the voting age at 21. Jagan was very irritated and came back in what he called a solution and a period of crisis, which resulted in bloodshed, mayhem, particularly along the coast of this country. It was terrible because I had fought at Congress Place at that time. And in those days, the General Secretary was a real general, I can tell you. And the rest is history. After elections again in 64, Bonham went to the British government and he and De Guerre said, we prepared to form a coalition government. The first coalition, they agreed. Jagan refused to resign, and the British, because they had troops here, had to make an order in council to put him out of office. That started another round of violence. In his address to the nation, and I believe all of us would have heard that speech, Burnham tried to heal the wounds and said, for us, the Portuguese are important, and he named the other races, all are important. And we went out to a place like Leonora on the West Emerald, which was a center of violence and discord, and got people from the continuous villages to come together and build schools, police station, and the health center. All this time opposed by the People's Progressive Party. And let us fast track to Independence Day, 1966. At the conference held at Lancaster House, Burnham wanted independence on February 23rd because he contended that is the date that the slaves struck for their freedom. The British said it did not give enough time to settle the modalities for independence. De Geer, on the other hand, wanted the 1st of August. The PNC side said, look, we didn't want a date of freedom set by the British. We want a date set by the African slaves for their freedom. So they looked at a date between August and February and came with a date in May. But beyond that, we found that the Dutch had an advanced constitution on the 26th of May, 1918 something. And that's how the date for independence came. I see a lot of revisionists who are trying to write history, given other reasons, but that was the reason and no other reason. After independence, we sought to heal. But to answer your question, we have not yet achieved the goal, the magnificence of one people, one nation, one destiny.
All right, that's a background from one who would have been part of all that
Drama,
if you want to call it drama. So we have our two, I myself, I was born after independence, and of course the other two younger panelists would have been even younger than I am, born after independence, but we grew up in a time when there was this whole furor about one people, one nation, one destiny, and there was a lot of hype and I don't know what do we call it, but the patriotism seemed to have been there. But for Amanza, for you experiencing Guyana from the time that you were born to now, and looking at this picture, understanding this concept of one people, one nation, one destiny, after having listened to the former Prime Minister, what are your thoughts in terms of where we are?
Well, I have to first say that I'm grateful that we still have Elder around, because it is very important that when people attempt to revise history, that we have people who were there on the scene at the time to correct that, because this thing about revisionist history continues to be an issue where we attempt to rewrite Guyana's history to suit our party and our propaganda. So I'm grateful that he is here to still give us the background and the context. I agree with the statement that you made when you said that growing up, the patriotic spirit was there. Because for me as a child, it was. And I recall I grew up on the quarantine and spent my formative years in Linden. But in primary school, you had to know national songs. You had to recite the pledge. And there was a concerted effort to instill in us love of country and loyalty to country. And it is something that I don't see present today. You do not feel the spirit of Guyana. And so I often ask, what does it mean to be Guyanese? Because I believe that we have lost that spirit. For me, I don't believe that we are anywhere close to achieving one nation, one people, one nation, one destiny. what is even more disturbing for me is that I'm seeing a political rebranding into one Guyana, which is, it's quite a shame, because actually it was Brindley Ben from the PPP that gave a very eloquent speech, that motto, one people, one nation, with one people, one nation, one destiny. That is where it came from. I believe that we have lost sight of the fact that the struggle for independence and the achievement of freedom, that it did not stop there. I keep saying that the maintenance of freedom requires work. The maintenance of independence requires work. And so the question continues to be, are we as a nation prepared to put in the work that it will take to, one, not only to maintain our independence, because of course you have now the issue of colonialism in another guise, but are we prepared to put in the work, one, and two, are we prepared to see this Guyana experiment succeed and to do what it takes for it to succeed? So to summarize, from the time growing up on the Quarantine Coast as a little girl to now, I have seen a waning of the Guyanese spirit and this thing called Guyana. I recall tales from my parents of national service and how far that went towards addressing this issue of race, because you had Guyanese of all walks of life, all races there in one place working together, and they have formed friendships that last up to today, irrespective of their ethnicity. And so you had those deliberate experiments in forging a national identity that have been done away with, and we're seeing the results today. And that is, you have a Guyana where it's each man for himself, where there's a widening gap between the rich and the poor. And in spite of the propaganda of one Guyana, what you have are two Guyanas emerging. One with the poor and working class, and the other one with the oligarchs and the wealthy and the elite. And so I'm saddened to say that I do not see that we are anywhere close to achieving that.
Ronald, what do you think?
I'm thinking, no, actually, I feel so inclined to interrogate Mr. Green, because
The information.
indeed, I'm sitting there listening to him, and it's very rare that you get this opportunity, right, to share the same space with someone who has had that organic experience. And my exposure to the notion of independence has been, of course, largely through reading, because I was born long after independence. And the nuances of the independence struggle, as are documented now by Mr. Green, of course you don't pick up those nuances in the written material. Hence my seduction to perhaps just sit here and interrogate him.
But you're not the host of this
I appreciate that. But what growing up, I'm originally from Linden, and I've grown up largely on the east bank of the Moara. Now, as a child, I had no idea as to the notion and the concept of independence. I had no notion and idea as to I had no idea as to the notion and concept of race. I mean, throughout my primary school life, as not too distinct from the experience of Amanza, right, there was largely that unity among us children, without any distinction that, you fall under one umbrella, I fall under another umbrella. And I remember those days that we would stand out sometimes even in the rain as we say our national pledge and we sing our patriotic songs. And so, but of course, I had no sense that was part and parcel of a larger national ideal and a socialization into, really directing our energies towards that national ideal. it was not until perhaps I got to high school, then I became aware of the nature of the society that I live in. And at high school, I saw that in a way of this type of patriotic drive. There was no singing of national songs. We would say the pledge from time to time, but not as ritualistically as we did in primary school. And I don't know if the experience in the rural schools and the rural communities was perhaps different from in the urban areas. And in high school I became conscious, I'm black, and black has a certain connotation in the society in which I'm living. And other students are East Indian, Amerindians, and perhaps a combination of those major groups. And life meant different things for them. And even in my early high school experience of socialization, I began to document certain things as to what was the general experience of the students who look a certain way as against students who look another way. Right, what their social circumstances were like, what their material circumstances were like, what the response, even from the teachers to them, were like, and the response from the teachers to us were like. So from very early on, I recognized that we do not have a sense of community, we do not have a sense of nationhood, we do not have a sense of being a Guyanese people. And I'm sitting there listening to Mr. Green, and if any particular event I will bring to the fore in terms of crafting that independence ideology would be the 1962 Constitutional Conference chaired by Duncan Sandys, who was then the Colonial Secretary.
62.
That's 1962. Yes, and I think that might have been the first of the conferences in which the ideal of independence was, forcibly articulated. And Burnham emphasized in that conference that independence is really a non-negotiable, because he felt that the circumstances were ever so and always ripe for Guyanese to take the reins of their own destiny. And he said, coming out of that conference, when himself and Mr. Degar and Mr. Jagan were sent back to see how best they could work out the ideological differences, what he said was that independence is not just an emotive or a sentimental occasion. It is really the vehicle through which we craft our destinies, social, political, and economic. And he has articulated that in rather broader terms, and that has been from my study of his contributions. His drive has been one of nationalism, one of regionalism, and one of cooperative socialism. And now we're seeing re-emerging, and I dare say in a somewhat cosmetic way, the whole thrust towards regionalism, right? The whole thrust towards, that sense of community, as articulated in the phrase "one Guyana." So over the years, and even now, I'm not seeing the ideals of independence as articulated when we were fighting vigorously to secure independence manifested.
All right, let me ask Mr. Green this question. one Guyana. Amanza made reference to it. Ronald made reference to it. You have said that we are nowhere close to one people, one nation, one destiny. You also said that Barnum knew what was needed for independence in Guyana. What distinction would you make between this one Guyana and one people, one nation, one destiny?
Let me say three sets of things. I get the impression that the incumbent administration seem hell-bent in changing what, as I said, Mr. Barnum did. He is the only man who set out to make a reality of one people, one nation. They don't want to use those terms, so they come with this one Guyana frivolity. But I think if our students are to be serious about tomorrow, we need to know where we came from. The two major groups in this country are the Indo-Guyanese and the Afro-Guyanese. Afro-Guyanese made the greatest, without apologies, contribution to civilizing the entire coastal belt. They dug canals 40 feet deep where they had no bulldozers. There's a whole mantra of divide and rule, and Guyanese of every ethnicity need to understand that has come back with a passion. And it has to do with understanding our history. Let me give but one example. When slavery was abolished, or when the Emancipation Act became relevant, the British, instead of dealing with the manumitted Africans, brought in people from outside. As President Ali said in the presentation recently, they all came for betterment. He made the mistake of referring to slaves. He had to correct himself because the slaves didn't come for betterment. But I think we need to see this thing in its context, and we don't have time to discuss it in full. First, the Indians who came here had an advantage culturally and otherwise. Today, as we speak, you hear Prasad sing Supal. You know it's an Indian. But you hear of Green, John, whatever, Hinds. Who are you talking about? A black Englishman? So beginning there, the very labels we carry is a burden to the African and the manumitted Africans. Beyond that, beginning in 1926, when Sharma came from the Indian Council, he went throughout this country. The largest meeting was at a place called Burziri, telling Indians who were tempted to go back to India to stay here to develop the land, because at that time India was having sporadic famine, and develop the agriculture and introduce the idea that who owns the land owns the country. Some of the Afro-Guyanese didn't quite understand the depth of that. So that you had India, the continent, supporting the Indians here. At that time, there was British India. Only after the Second World War ended and they had the problems as they sought independence, which they got in 1947. India split into Bangladesh, Ceylon, which was Sri Lanka, now Sri Lanka, and Pakistan. But before then was one British India. Not so with Africa. By that time, the Europeans, imperialists, had already dismantled, disfigured, dismantled Africa. So the Portuguese, in fact, if you go to Ghana today, there are still 40 slave castles as evidence of the cruelty of the Europeans, imperialists. So you had the French, the British, the Portuguese, and the Dutch, who all plundered Africa. So as we approach independence, there's no single African state with the gump and capacity to advise the manumitted Africans as the Indians did. We must not cry over spilt milk, but young people must be seized with this information so they have the strength and as I said, the gumption and the intellectual capacity to release their creative energies to overcome these quirks and challenges of history. Beyond that, as we see today with oil and gas, the Europeans never gave up their quest to own and control. And this is happening, and because some who now hold office are very self-centered or myopic, I think Amanza used the correct word, a burgeoning oligarchy. A very serious matter. And I hope our young people understand what is taking place. So that my dream, my vision is that before the Lord takes me away from this earthly place, we can do something to help stimulate our young people by education so that they have the gumption to agitate, so that we can be truly liberated. We're not liberated when you have the two main political groups, for some reason, being unable to sit down and speak to the oil giants, as happened with sugar and bauxite. But the two titans wanted to overcome that because Burnham understood our history. And that is why we got Dr. Jacob to give what we call critical support. But even that, Chile had difficulty with those in high places who felt it was a dangerous thing because they, and as they still do, see themselves as inheriting as the new master race in this country. Very serious matter. Unless our young people have the gumption to understand it and resist it peacefully, of course. I said PESC, not PIEC. We will not achieve the goal of that Burnham articulated: one people, one nation, one destiny. It is a philosophical underpinning of our country. Fortunately, I speak to a number of younger Indo and Afro Guyanese, and they seem to want to overcome this hump that we inherited from the colonial masters. But unless we have the intellectual strength and hopefully produce some person or group of persons to give us the kind of leadership that Burnham did. That, of course, is a difficult task because Burnham was in a class by himself. And for that new leadership, whether it emerges from the PP or PNC, must be able to bring on board and re-engineer what Burnham did. The things that Burnham did to bring unity and oneness were first, national service. And my first contention with Desmond Hoyt is when he listened to the all European plantocracy and Jimmy Carter, who was from the Deep South. And I told him that my mother lived in the Deep South and I don't trust those guys. I said to him, we could not afford not to afford national service because I think, as Amanza said, it will begin to harmonize our people. Second thing is Burnham's emphasis on sport and culture. Culture is a thing that will make us Africans enjoy Indian music and vice versa. And culture must not be taken as a frivolous thing. I sent a letter which the Starbuck was published, I think, 2 days ago, to point out the absolute vulgarity and absurdity of the Ministry of Culture saying two things. He has to prove everything and increasing the cost to producers, including Link Show, for use of the cultural center. With all this oil money, people who are culturally emancipated and understand the importance of culture in an independent country would reduce substantially or remove, except for basic charges, people who want to showcase our culture, whether we sing, dance, or otherwise. Here again, Burnham showed the way. Burnham had 2 Afro-Guyanese sent to India to learn Indian dance. Philip McClintock and the other, I don't remember the name now, an Afro-Guyanese who got married to an Indian gentleman. I sat down next to the Indian High Commissioner once, and he said, he described himself as being a culturally advanced person in India. And he said he traveled all over India. And he's never seen anybody perform Indian dancing, including Kathak, and the sophisticated dances, as Philip McClinton did. Fortunately, Philip died too early. And it is something that Burnham did. And I said to the present Prime Minister at a function at Buxton the other day, so all you have to do, if you have any good sense, is to persuade your government to follow the footsteps made by Lyndon Forbes Sampson Burnham. And you can't go wrong. Culture, sport. I don't want to delay this program, but Burnham understood the importance of those 2 aspects of our lives.
Amanza.
Burnham magic brought Clive Lloyd back with Alvin Kalishuran.
I was at the match at board.
Exactly.
The helicopter came down.
Well, let me tell you the whole story about that. The West Indies board didn't want, as has happened before, a Guyanese to be captain of the West Indies team. Clive had both the ability, he was in ripping form. And they said they couldn't get Clive released from his club in Australia. Burnham telephoned Sir Lionel Lockwood, who was a High Commissioner in London, who got in touch with the Australian Prime Minister and arranged for Clive's release within hours. As he traveled towards Guyana, there was a strange delay in Trinidad, because it beat in Trinidad at the time. And Captain Larry London was the pilot of the helicopter. Burnham gave instructions to Lloyd, put on your pads, come with your bat in hand to go straight to GCC. And Laurie hovered that helicopter over GCC, and I think he wanted to land. But he landed at Square of the Revolution. Burnham sent outriders to bring Clive straight in to GCC, and they created a record with an Indo-Guyanese scripture, Alvin Kalichuran. And from that day we called it Burnham Magic. I say that because Burnham was a titan who wanted to see how people work together. I can tell you about Shivnarine Chandapal, my personal thing. I was speaking with Sonny Mohan at Mahiko one day, and he said to me, "We have a boy who's batting all day, but he hasn't got good gear." At that time, I just got gears in from London, bats, everything, top quality gear. I didn't know who he was. I put him on my Jeep. Eric Mosley was my driver. Brought him down to my house, gave him a set of gears for himself and his colleagues. And I didn't know it was Shivnarine Chandapal until he came to a function at City Hall with this boy and called me aside and said, "Remember the boy you brought to your house and gave him gears? I am that boy." By that he was famous. And that's the kind of thing that we need to do in this country, not those cultural barbarians we had.
All right, Amanza, the Mr. Hamilton Dream did make some mention of it, but I want you to develop a bit more on this oligarch and whether this one Guyana thing that we're talking about, how does it mirror, if it does at all, one people, one nation, one destiny?
Well, some may want to say that it is the one and the same, but you see, I beg to differ. One is sloganeering, one Guyana. You see, one people, one nation, one destiny reminds us every day that we are inextricably tied to each other, so that our destinies are literally intertwined. And what that does psychologically is that it informs the way you act towards your fellow citizen. One Guyana, what does that mean? Elder spoke about the vicissitudes that brought the races here, which is why I keep saying that it is so important, Deon, that this Guyana experiment work. It has to work. A man, as in a human being, his greatest sense of self and identity is the land in which he is born. And I'm born Guyanese. We all here are born Guyanese. And this is why you find in some countries men willing to die for their flag.
Mm-hmm.
Because ingrained in them is a sense of, this is my land. This is what I need to protect. Because it is such an integral part of me. Yes, my ancestors are African. Yes, your ancestors may be Indian. But we are born here. And so this is why it is so important that we make this work, because this is authentically and organically ours. We keep reaping, I think, the bitter harvest, like I said, of those seeds planted so long ago in colonialism. And what you are seeing when I talk about the oligarchs that are emerging is a new plantocracy, as Elder said. Mm-hmm. So the divide and rule is still there, except that the plantocracy now looks like some of us. And so we have to continue to speak to our young people, not to be distracted by this. Because it's easy to be seduced with the entertainment and fast money and so on. Our country, our Guyana, is ours to build. And we have to build it. And when Elder talks about sports and culture, I'm sure he does not mean bringing the latest entertainer at the national park and it ends up in gunshots and whatever. But in providing a space for the authentic expression of our Guyanese-ness. Right? There are very few places that we can go on Awi and Ayo and they know what we mean. Right? Or I say, I'm going to, you grew up among Indian. I grew up in a mixed village. And so some of their language, I understand their authentic expressions, and the mixture of that is something that is so uniquely Guyanese. How do we foster and grow that? Instead, we now have carnival. And mind you, I don't have an issue with entertainment, if you get my point. But we also have Mashramani, which is ours. Why not have pride in that product and develop it to where it becomes an attraction to the world? It is that pride of nationhood, I think, that we have lost. And one of the things that I noted with the independence struggle is that President Burnham did not stop there. He said we need to perfect this thing, and so we went on to become a republic state, because as he noted, it was not just a matter of independence, but a matter of emancipating ourselves mentally from the shackles of colonialism and having a complete break with colonial powers. And so I think what we're seeing, Deon, is the whittling away of that, the complete erosion of our Guyanese identity, of our authentic self, as seen by something as simple as the hike in the cost of the cultural center, which is where you go to get the most authentic Guyanese experience, which is where our creative center is, which is where our creatives have a space to bring out their uniqueness and their unique Guyanese attributes. And now you've made the cost of that venue prohibitive. These are the things that are done, and while they may seem on the face of it to be, harmless as it were, they're a part of a concerted effort to erode and to continue to erode the unifying of Guyanese for one insidious purpose, to maintain domination and control. Because I guarantee you, Guyanese that look like me, Guyanese that are of Indo descent, Amerindian descent, are all punishing at this point in time in terms of the cost of living, in terms of being able to afford to send their children to school. And so you hear about one Guyana, and you hear about average Guyanese cannot say that that is reflected. But we're being told about part-time contracts and jobs, part-time jobs. Guyanese do not need that. We need to be able to feed, to be able to house, and to be able to clothe every Guyanese. And any Guyanese who can read knows that this is not something that is invented today. So for the present government to pretend as if it is their idea is an insult. It is a further insult that the person who conceptualized that they would refuse to have an exhibition in his honor, as if he were not a president of this republic. And so are we any closer to one people, one nation, one destiny? Absolutely not.
So Ronald, there is an insidious nature. I want to recognize the people who are online, who have joined us from New York and all across the world, who are watching with us. I really don't have my glasses, so I can't see a lot of what you're saying on the computer screen there. But we recognize your presence, and we're happy that you're with us. Ronald, time is really catching up on us. A lot of we are hinting at it, that there is something insidious that is happening in relation to this oligarch, a deep sense of a plan to not only divide, but to ensure that their resources, particularly oil and gold and so on, are channeled in a particular direction. How do you feel about that perception? There is a definite plan to take control and to keep us at the bottom of the social ladder as black people.
No, I think that question can easily be directed to the ordinary man in the street, the ordinary man at the marketplace, and especially at the marketplace, right, who is having such a difficulty with his bread and butter issues, right? He is hearing on all of these political platforms that our country is doing well, our country is moving in a progressive direction, that, things are glittering and things are golden. But then he doesn't have the ability to put a meal on the table. And I can tell you, just this morning I went to the market, and I was so surprised at the prices for produce there. And I'm thinking, the person who has the misfortune of working for minimum wage and having to confront the harsh realities of paying a rent, having to confront the harsh realities of sending multiple children to school, and especially those emanating from single-parent households. Right? What does this progress mean for them? This progress means nothing tangible for them. And we're seeing a lot of distributions of contracts. We're seeing a lot of infrastructural development. But when we interrogate where those contracts are going and who is benefiting from those contracts, right, I'm not sure we can say that this newfound wealth is filtering where it needs to filter. So am I going to say in a concrete sense that there seems to be this concerted effort to marginalize a certain section of society? I think the writing is on the wall.
But you know, in relation to culture, the guys who worked at the National Cultural Center and we had a film center, and even GBC, when you were growing up, there was a library at the GDS. There's one at Radio Demerara. The film center kept a record of a whole host of events, and I speak with, and this is an Indian guy, and he would tell me that during their time, if they wanted a performance from an Amerindian group, they could have pinpointed exactly where to go and to locate that group to come to perform at an international event, because there was a hand on every facet of culture across Guyana. Sadly, in the era of the PPP, those things were destroyed. All of the information that would have been gathered, that would have allowed us to understand who we are, they just left them in the rain, they put them outside, all the tapes you cannot find. I listened some time ago to a very beautiful account of our independence, and with Pilgrim Potter Rodway and the writing of the national anthem and the entire thing. I don't know if you can find that. And that was at GBC at the time. You know, that how they came about. Luca wrote the anthem, and then they were asked to put the scripts together. The 3 songs, all 3 can be played to the lyrics of the Guyana national anthem. You know?
These are certainly things that, that should be preserved.
Right, but they've destroyed all those things.
You know, I just something to remark briefly. And I read with a measure of sadness the challenges some of the folks who wanted to hold shows at the Cultural Center confronted, and with this 600+% increase in these various charges, even in terms of the rehearsal charges, and the difficulties they had with meeting the Minister of Culture, Youth and Sport, and the several attempts that they've made even by going to his office so that they can get an audience with him, so that they can negotiate the use of this venue. And they've lamented that it seems that any use of this venue has to be sanctioned by him. And the fact that he is not even meeting with them, not responding to their requests, etc., right, leave them with no option but to seek out alternative venues for these cultural expressions. And I was having a discussion with somebody with respect to this experience, and the inquiry that they made was, is it because of, you know, a couple of new seats that we have to confront this harsh reality? And as both Mr. Green and Amanza said, culture is a unifying force. The arts are a unifying force. There are few things that bring us together and have us identify in a common space as Guyanese, other than those things. Right, when you're at these events, you're at a cricketing event, you're at a cultural, a Shirley Cultural Center, right, you're jamming shoulders, you're expressing yourself, knocking glasses with the person next to you, irrespective of what that person looks like. And these are the type of things that we would want to amplify, I would imagine, and not to create any impediment for these expressions.
But let me ask you young people, where does this leave us, this attempt that you're talking about of simply siphoning off resources to channel in one ethnic direction and suffocating, as Mr. Green said, one ethnic group so that this domination can be proliferated. Where does that leave us with one people, one nation, one destiny? What are the implications for that?
Like, forgive me, I made the observation that going back to this rebranding of one people, one nation, one destiny to one Guyana, right? One Guyana can't be one Guyana for some and another Guyana for others. And, we have to come to that place of political maturity where we can recognize that we all have an entitlement to our resources, we all have an entitlement to these various spaces, and no one person or no one group has any superior entitlement to the other. And even looking at the agricultural conference, and we have the other rebranding in the form of grow more as against produce or perish. Why can't we be mature enough to say, well, you know what? I recognize that this is a policy that can benefit our country irrespective from where it emanated. And even if we have to tweak that policy, right, to acclimatize to contemporary times, we can still employ those policies and give the proper recognition where it is due. Right, we obviously don't have the existence of our aspirations, one people, one nation, one destiny, and we are going to continue to pull in different directions. And once we do so, what is going to be more pronounced than anything else is the diverse economic realities that we would be exposed to.
Amanza, put on your political hat now.
I've been resisting that all evening, but look, let me say that one Guyana is too subjective. Because what does it mean? My friend over here will have one opinion, elder will have another interpretation. Exactly what does that mean? And if you notice, they have not been able to articulate very clearly what it means. So it is subjective. It just depends on whose opinion is the prevailing one at the time. And that is dangerous because it lacks certainty. And where there's no certainty, you're begging for chaos. The issue of that Ronald raised earlier about the cost of living is something that we cannot ignore. A woman in Mocha lost 3 of her children because she had to leave them to go to work. In a nation of less than 800,000 people, we hear about the billions that we have, and our GDP is the fastest growing. But that reality, that is not the waking reality of the average Guyanese. And I often caution people on both sides of the political divide that our safest way to build Guyana is to ensure that there is the equitable allocation of resources, that there is the implementation of proper poverty amelioration programs. Because while it may seem advantageous for now, for you to be getting the resources, you are creating a class of the have and the have-nots. And you're creating a group of people with nothing to lose and some with everything to lose. And you are setting Guyana on the path to becoming a failed state. Because when you have people who have nothing to lose, and you have everything to lose, your very existence becomes jeopardized. So is it not best for you to ensure that there's equitable distribution, and that if you're from a PPP stronghold or a PNC stronghold, that the resources are allocated equitably? It is a matter of safety for every Guyanese. When there's equitable access and the equitable distribution of resources, it is foolhardy to think that by starving people of resources, that you will not create a situation where one day this country will descend into civil unrest. And so I implore, wherever I go, that we start to look at government based on policies. Elect governments based on who has the best policy and who have designed the best interventions for all Guyanese. This race-based politics has been an albatross around the necks of our people. And young people like ourselves, we're tired of it. We want to see maturity in politics, as Ronald said. There is no harm in saying, this is a project from the previous administration that we see the wisdom of continuing, instead of disbanding it to bring it back in a different guise, wasting taxpayers' monies. We, the people of Guyana, however, have to demand more, Deon. It is up to us. Power concedes nothing without a demand being placed on it. And so, for there to be change, enough Guyanese have to be fed up. I go into the supermarket and I am saying, I am not sure how many Guyanese are drinking milk, because one pack of foreign leaf is $700. The minimum wage in Guyana in the private sector is $45,000. How are people living? These are the things that the current administration must concern themselves with. People cannot eat roads. They cannot eat infrastructure. And so they must recognize that you are in the seat of government and you are accountable now. And so the days of blaming and shifting blame is far gone. You inherited money from the Indian Natural Resources Fund. How are you putting that towards the betterment of Guyanese? So that when I go to the market, I do not have to pay $400 for a pound of plantain.
We got $25,000, man. Don't worry. That's.
But and this is the point, you know, these paltry sums. And none of these guys, because they live in a bubble off of taxpayers' money, have any idea what the single mother goes through.
All right, we'll have to tie up now because we.
You see, you asked me to put down political action.
No, I'm not cutting you off.
Just kidding.
But we'll be back for, we were given 15 minutes extra. I noticed that our clock is. So we're going to have to tie up, but I'm concerned about the quest for this grow more, whatever they're calling it, and the exclusion of black people. They're giving land to Barbadians and all, and so on. And there is an effort to distribute lands as a continuous process to allocate lands to the exclusion of black people, so that this farming that they're talking about doesn't involve this sector that we talk, this race group that we're talking about. And it's something that I will ask you all to come back and discuss, because it's another form of exclusion from the economic prospects. But Mr. Green, in tying up, your last words for how can we move forward?
I hope that our young people, those to my right and others, could work, and it's going to be a lot of work, so that we get our young people to ensure that things are put in place so they can release their creative energies for the benefit of all the people of Guyana. And that even though one people, one nation, one destiny seem a distant path, we must remain optimistic. I've lived through a time when there was gloom, but we stood the course. We got our independence, we moved to Republican status, and in spite of the difficulties of the Cold War and the oil crisis, we survived. Today a lot depends, and my appeal is to our young people, our young political activists, to go out into the highways and the byways and talk to our young people so that they're stimulated to agitate for peace and real freedom, real liberation for all of our people. Unless we did that, it's going to take a lot of work. because we're at a stage where they have bastardized the PR. They have turned this whole thing upside down. And this thing about the cultural center is beyond race, you know, it is beyond an intolerance to let people speak and to have culture, dance, music, demonstrate what we are. And again, I call Burnham's name. In 1972, when Burnham's idea created Carrie Festus, and people like the two Pilgrim Brothers, Dolphins, and Bonnie Fernandez, who built the facilities to house the people at Festival City. He did that so we can harmonize our cultural strains for the benefit of our people. And even then, the PUP seemed to have told people, don't take part. When we tried to get national service to be all-consuming, they told all sorts of things what happened to the girls. Same girls who go and walk around New York and Manhattan in certainly not propitious conditions.
Okay, Amanza, your last words.
Well, like Elder, I believe that there is hope. I remain hopeful that this aspiration of one people, one nation, one destiny will be realized, and it will be realized in our time. I believe that there is a hunger in young people in particular for more, and that we're beginning to see that more is possible. And we're beginning to see that it does not have to be like this, and that we actually do have the power to change things. And so I want to call on our young people today, because we spoke here about independence. President Burnham, they were in their 30s when they led the struggle for independence. They were young, vibrant men and women who saw the birthing of this nation. And I think we are at a juncture again where there needs to be a rebirth. I had called it a renewal of our Republican spirit, where we...
Renaissance.
A renaissance, as it were. I think it is possible. I believe in the young people of Guyana to make it a reality. I am not without hope, but I'm not naive. I know that we will have to have the hard conversations. I know that we will have to have the apologies where necessary, because history is history. The past is the past. There is nothing that we can do to undo it, but we can certainly use it as our guide to move forward and to avoid the pitfalls. There is enough in Guyana for every Guyanese to live a happy, healthy, productive life. And my message to us is, it does not have to be this way. But my question to us is, are we willing to do what is necessary to effect the change, so that our children and our children's children can grow up in a land that is theirs, and just lead healthy, happy, productive lives?
Ronald.
But I think that it's really, in my estimation, a two-part consideration. We have to appreciate it. We have a sense of responsibility, right, to our countrymen. Those of us who are in a position to analyze, comprehend, and articulate their plight, and to sensitize them not only to the gravity of their plight, but also to what is it they're entitled to alleviate that plight, and how they can go about accessing that entitlement. And I would call on our young people and our wider citizenry to not be seduced by these handouts. Don't allow our circumstances, irrespective of how grave our circumstances are, to force us into accepting that this is all that is available to us, or to get excited by these periodic handouts. There must be fundamental change. As Amanza said, there is more than enough to go around to ensure that each and every one of us have an existence that is underscored by the dignity that it should be underscored by. And nobody should be poor, or nobody should be living in squalor in a country with so much. So we cannot allow the direction of our country to be exclusively the purview of those who have an appetite for plenty.
And for domination.
Well, once you have an appetite for plenty, you will have an appetite for domination, because you only get access to that plenty by dominating. And young people too should understand that you have a sense of responsibility to yourself as well. And you have a sense of responsibility to want more and not to be comfortable in your circumstances, and to equip yourselves, avail yourselves of all opportunities, even opportunities that you have to create to ensure that you move from point A to point B, especially in this climate. Don't be left behind.
Okay, I want to thank you all for being on this. This is a special program that it's collaboration between IDPADA-G and the Cuffy 250 movement, and it's our special independence program, and I think the discussion this evening was very enlightening, and I am hopeful that the points of view that you've put forward, particularly for us to get out of this dilemma, I think it will take some struggle, and I think your point about those who might be being concerned about what they may lose is one that is pretty strong, and they should understand that the haves can be done by the have-nots, but they don't want to recognize that. Well, we see it when we march on Regent Street, you know. It's just a denial of things. But it's been a pleasure having you all, and I look forward to more programs like these, because Cuffy 250 and IDPADA-G will be collaborating more to bring more of these discussions. So if I call upon you again, I hope you will be willing to come and let's continue this discourse.
To continue.
We'll
Right.
be more than happy to.
Thank you so kindly for having us.
To the folks
Thank
out
you for
there,
having us.
it's been a pleasure being with you this evening, and we will keep you in tune once we have more of these discussions. Do have a pleasant night to all who have joined us on Facebook and on the television station live. Good night.
Baba.